Well, let's speak to Rose Gottemoeller, who is a former NATO Deputy Secretary General and a former Undersecretary of International Security for President Obama. Good afternoon to you, Rose.
Good afternoon. Nice to hear you.
Well, really good to speak to you. What do you make of those remarks from Ben Wallace, the British Defence Secretary? Was he wise to talk about a whiff of Munich, about the international efforts to try to ease the tensions and persuade President Putin to pull back?
I think it is easy to reach for that dire, really disaster for Western diplomacy on the brink of World War II, the Munich meetings. And so we often tend to, but I really agree with your diplomatic correspondent who just spoke to say the situation is much different now with quite a coherent NATO alliance hanging together strongly. Clearly, yes, there are economic differences among the various partners in the NATO alliance and the allies. Germany having stronger economic ties to Russia. But in general, I do think that the allies are really working well together. There's a coherence there that is remarkable and frankly was driven by Putin and what he has been up to.
Well, you say there's been a remarkable degree of unity within the NATO alliance, but as you referred there, Germany has made it clear that it's not necessarily ready to cancel that Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which takes supplies from Russia into Germany. President Macron was deemed to have gone a lot further than, for example, the British government would be willing to go in terms of negotiating with President Putin. Isn't there a danger here that there are real differences as all the different nations try in their own ways to dissuade the Kremlin from further aggression?
2 points here. First of all, I think it's important to recollect Chancellor Scholz's visit to Washington this week, wherein it was not he, of course, but President Biden said very clearly that if Russia should invade Ukraine, then no gas would flow through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And he said clearly also, this is an agreed position. Scholz did not disagree with him. And I think that's an important point. I do understand that there are certain legal constraints on Chancellor Scholz about speaking out about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline while this certification review is going on by their regulatory agency. So I can't speak to that. I'm not a German citizen, but that is what I've heard from others who are more expert in the arena. So let's take the fact that he did not contradict President Biden as important. The second thing I'd emphasize is the different leaders in Europe have different roles right now. And Schultz and Macron both, they are participants in this so-called Normandy format. And everyone is trying to get Russia, Ukraine, and of course, France and Germany as the facilitators back to the table to return to the Minsk Accords and try to get some diplomatic progress going to solve the problem in the Donbass, eastern Ukraine. So let's also pay attention to the different roles that Macron and Schulz have, and that they really need to be talking to Putin right now.
What about this suggestion, which is being aired quite openly, that Russia could try some sort of false flag operation to give him an excuse to invade Ukraine?
Well, he's a KGB man, and he's surrounded by KGB men. This is part of their playbook, these kinds of operations, and they have apparently already been trying to implement one of them. The UK government itself, 2 weekends ago, having discovered one and outed it. I think that's important. The way that both Washington and London have been putting out some important intelligence and making it clear that Russia can't act with impunity here. I think that's a very important message and has been I think, important to helping to steer the crisis at the current stage. But things like false flag operations and the other bag of tricks that the KGB uses, we have to be constantly alert to them.
President Biden had an hour-long conversation with Putin yesterday. He was warning of the severe costs of an invasion. But do you think that the US's attitude and approach to this crisis was somewhat undermined early on when President Biden seemed to suggest, well, if there was just a minor incursion into Ukraine, maybe that wouldn't be too serious?
I think the USG has been very, very firm and clear in its remarks. Since that time, President Biden himself circled around to say any incursion is an incursion, and that will lead to these dire results that the United States has been has been talking about, along with NATO allies, this heavy sanctions regime that the United States and allies have been talking about. So I do think that that point has been clarified, and I don't think it's a matter to question anymore.
We know that both the US, the UK, NATO itself have made it clear they're not going to be putting boots on the ground in Ukraine. Is there a danger that President Putin thinks, well, he can count on that for all these threats? As a nation, Russia's already facing some sanctions, it's survived them, that he will see that as a sign of weakness?
I don't think so. I think everyone understands Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. That's the NATO founding treaty, which is that NATO allies have the right to be defended by other NATO allies. But Ukraine, as a partner of NATO, it does not have that same right. It does the same obligation does not apply to Ukraine. I think the NATO allies and different partners also are doing a lot to help provide weaponry to Ukraine, to help to train them. The Ukrainian army is not what it was in 2014 when Putin seized Crimea. So the Russian army is not going to just get a bloodied nose if they choose to invade Ukraine. It will be a serious fight. Of course, they're vastly superior. So the Ukrainian army will be defeated. But I do think that there's a key difference there that we should be paying attention to. The situation is much different from 2014, including in the military realm. And I've been really interested that some Russian senior figures are starting to speak up now. Retired KGB general called Sevastyanov just came public in the last 24 hours saying Putin understands what the heavy burden of such an invasion will be for Russia. And I think those kinds of messages coming out of Russia are very interesting right now.
So, what's your assessment? Do you think President Putin is going to, having amassed those troops there, could he pull them back? Or do you think that, as others have suggested, an invasion really could be imminent?
Well, I have to take President Biden's concerns very, very seriously. I was glad that he and Putin spoke for an hour yesterday. When two leaders like that at the highest level speak for an hour, it means they had a serious conversation. So I think that does mean that serious diplomacy is still possible and is still underway. So that's a good point. The second thing I find interesting is Putin has been very clear that he will, quote, take the advice of my military leadership in steps that I need to take. So that, in a way, gives him an out. It's not he who would be backing down. He could say, my generals tell me that it's time to begin pulling back. We've completed our exercises. So there still is a possibility for a little face saver for him, and I hope that will be the case, but I just can't tell at the moment.
Rose Gottemoeller, former NATO Deputy Secretary General, a former Undersecretary of International Security for President Obama. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.